Okay guys, so what I want to show you how to do is I want to show you how to do a value scale. Now, for those of you who are in Drawing 2, you have yet to review this. And for those of you who are in Drawing 1, well, you've already done this, but I encourage you to continue to practice it. One of the advantages of working with a value scale and practicing a value scale is not just that you are learning to see the different values that ultimately you're going to have to make in a drawing, but also you're learning how to manipulate the material. And so that ability to practice manipulating the material to a certain end is something that is, well, it's best done in a way without all the complexities of a completed drawing. And the value scale allows you to do that. So in other words, you're not dealing with your measurement, you're not dealing with your gesture, your regesture, all of your mechanical measurements and intuitive measurements. Here we're just isolating the use of the material and how you manipulate that material to a prescribed end. So I want you guys to make sure that you're practicing this, take notes on it, and let's get started. So the first thing I want to say about value is that the human eye can distinguish a lot of values. Now, if I give you a number, I'm kind of making it up. I don't really know exactly how many, but let's say it's in the hundreds, okay? So that means that if you have, say, a scale that goes from a highlight up at the top and graduates all the way down until you have a low dark down at the bottom, what you can see if you get up to that scale is you can see tiny little divisions in value that continue all the way down the scale until you are somewhere in the neighborhood of hundreds of different distinctions in value. Now, we don't look at our subject matter and try to address that kind of subtlety. You've heard me say it in class before, that you back up to subtlety, that you overstate and then you back up to subtlety. So we're not looking for 200, 300 different values to begin with. What we need to learn how to do is how to break this down so that we've got a set number of values that we can easily distinguish from each other at the very beginning. So the way to think about that is that out of all of those hundreds of different values, if you were to step back from that subtle gradation, from a distance, most people can see a range of about 9 values. Now, I'm not talking about that's all the values that we can see. This page is not white. So if I can make 9 values on this page, then it just follows that I could then take white paint, put it on the page, and voila, suddenly I can see 10. I can take a material like ink wash, which is extremely dark, at least straight out of the bottle, and I can put that on the page down here, and that's going to be a dense, dense black, something unachievable with the charcoal. So with the white paint and the ink, well, now I can see 11 values. So realize I'm not saying that we can only see 9 values. I'm saying that 9 values is the bare minimum that an average person is able to see easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this out by putting down a basic bar graph. So we're making essentially now a line drawing. If I were working in a still life or working in a figure drawing, I would be putting down a line drawing. And I'm making sure that I'm practicing this with heavy charcoal. I'm not using a vine charcoal. It doesn't impart enough pigment to the page. So I'm putting down a basic bar graph. In the center of this bar graph, I'm going to put down 1 bar. It's going to look just like that. I'm not talking about putting down just a line. I'm talking about putting a bar. Now, in order to break this up into 9 parts, I'm going to put 3 lines here. 1, 2, and 3. And then down below my original bar in the center, I'm going to put another 3 lines. 1, 2, and 3. So you notice this doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfectly, you don't have to take a ruler and work this. We're practicing this, okay? So it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to have 9 relatively equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so I'm ready to get started. I'm going to get started by pushing this pigment out into the page to see what value this particular amount of charcoal gives me when it's distributed evenly. So I'm going to grab a paper towel and I'm going to push this pigment out on the page. Now remember, when you practice, we're not talking about just kind of going through a step. I want you guys to make sure you're engaging the manipulation of this material with some integrity to what you're looking for. When you look at this, yes, I wiped it out. Matthew said wipe it out, wipe it out. But you notice you can see all kinds of streaks in this value scale. That means that I'm not really seeing the one value that this amount of pigment gives me. What I'm seeing is I'm seeing multiple values, otherwise I wouldn't see these streaks. So make sure that you take the paper towel, make sure that you push it out so that that pigment is evenly distributed throughout the entire scale. So you shouldn't see any streaks. You have to really bear down on the paper a bit, move in different directions. You notice what I do is I move in a circular direction. And when you see that it's not moving anymore, that's because the pigment has stained the tooth of the page. And that's giving you a real idea as to what value this amount of pigment creates. So now I've gone from no values in my value scale to now having one value in my value scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to start breaking this down into what is easily visible when you're confronting any subject matter. And that is not the subtlety of all those 200, 300 values. What is easily visible is basically three values. Okay? We have, say, everything that's generally light, everything that's generally dark, and then we have everything that's left over. Okay? So that gives us three values that we can recognize immediately upon looking at anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top third of this scale. 9 is easily divisible by 3. So I'm going to take the top 3 of this scale, and I'm going to take the value out. Now when I take that value out, realize that sometimes people will see me do this. They'll follow the instructions, but they'll be thinking a little bit ahead. And they think, oh, okay, so he takes all that value out of the top of the scale. So when I practice it, I'm not going to put any value in there to begin with. Keep in mind, guys, do it exactly the way that I'm showing you. Yes, put the value in and then take the value out. You don't want to start protecting parts of your page. So take it out as much as it will come out. And realize that one of the things that happens when you do this is you're not just removing pigment, but you're also burnishing the tooth of the page. That's a significant factor. In other words, the page is a part of your medium. And it's one of the reasons why I insist that you take it out. Because when you're working in a drawing, especially a value drawing, where there will be value everywhere on the page, just like in your line drawings, you're going to be making changes. You're going to be changing shapes and moving them around. So if I have an initial area that I don't touch at all, and other shapes change around it and start overlapping it, that area of the page is going to have a different tooth to it than the areas where I've made changes. And as a result, you're going to start seeing pigment take to certain areas differently. The areas that have been burnished and the areas where we were trying to protect it, not touching it to begin with. That's going to create a real lack of harmony in the kind of marks that you can make. And I'll show you that as we go on, because we're going to have that happen in our value scale, at least for a moment. So now, what do I have? I've gone from no value to one value, and now I have clearly two values. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put in everything that's generally dark. So down at the bottom third of the scale, I'm going to lay in some pigment. Now don't be concerned that when you lay it down it's streaks, but pay attention to the fact that when I lay it down, I'm not putting it down as a dense, low dark, okay? I'm putting it down as something that's darker than the mid value that I have here, and it's darker than the light. All I need to do at this stage is meet my goal. I need to see general light, general dark, something in between. And I don't want to bear down on it and put down so much pigment that it's going to make it really hard for me to work with. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pigment and push it into the page as well. Now you notice, in this case, I'm using my hand. Now for those of you who pay attention in class, you know I'm doing this because this makes that pigment stick to the tooth of the page. I don't want it to spread too much right now. And if I start trying to spread this pigment just with the paper towel is going to take too much of it off of that surface, and it's going to spread it to other areas. If I push it in with my hand, I'm adding a little bit of oil from my skin, acts as a little bit of a binder and pushes it deep into the tooth. So now, once I've got it pushed in with my hand, I'm going to spread it out with the paper towel and take some of that powder on the surface and spread it out to be a little bit more even. Don't worry if there's a few little streaks left. Those will go away as we continue to work with the material. So now I have 3 values. I want to start making some distinctions in the values at the top of this scale. I'm never going to take my charcoal. What did I do with my charcoal? I'm never going to take my charcoal and start touching the top of the scale. It doesn't make any sense. Charcoal is a black pigment, and black is always black. If I try to touch this surface very lightly, I might be able to put down a comparatively light mark to when I push it down heavy, but that's still nevertheless black pigment. What I want to do in order to create a range of lights is I want to put down pigment by redistributing it, not by adding it with the charcoal itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the paper towel, I'm going to use the pigment that's already on the page, and I'm just going to carry that pigment up the scale. It's very, very quick. You're going to start seeing a shift in value up here between what is eventually going to be our highlight and what is going to be the next value. Okay? Again, remember, you're paying attention not just to the step, but you're looking at what's happening. You don't want to go too dark too fast. That's probably a good distinction. We can see it probably from a distance, so that's where I'm going to leave it. But before I move on, I'm going to turn the paper towel to a clean part, and I'm just going to push this in and even it out. Remember, you want to craft this surface with an awareness that you are studying how this material works, not just that you've got something happening on the page. So I'm paying very close attention to the value that I'm getting right here. Now what I need to do is I need to get the next value, the third value, a little bit darker. Again, that's at the light half of the scale. So I'm not going to take pigment and put it in with the charcoal. I'm going to use pigment that I introduced in the bottom third of the scale. Now when I put this down, it might look darker than the first time I put it down. And that makes sense, right? Because I already put charcoal down there. So what you're seeing is you're seeing a layering of charcoal. Excuse me. Now, that means that every time I lay charcoal down, I'm not putting it down as a dense black. I'm putting it down the same way each time. It's naturally going to look darker. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you need to push down harder because you're just going to impart too much pigment to the page. So just like before, this time I'm touching the page a little bit lighter with my hand because I know I want more of this pigment to travel, so I don't want it to stick quite as much. You know, sometimes people will listen to this and they will take notes like the fourth time Matthew did this, he used his hand, but he said he used it only lightly. Keep in mind that it's going to vary. It's going to vary depending upon what you see and what you're engaging on the surface. The process should be the same, but the way you touch the page, how much pressure you use, how light you're putting it down. If I needed to carry less pigment up the scale, I would have only added pigment to the bottom too here, so I wouldn't have quite as much pigment to spread around. But I make a decision based upon what I'm seeing. So you engage the exercise, not just follow it, okay? So anyway, I'm going to take this pigment and I'm going to make that third value get darker. I'm going to carry it up the scale. Now, remember how I said that in treating the surface with the eraser, I'm scarring the surface of the page. You notice when I bring this pigment up, that third value gets darker. Well, great. But look, how come that third value got darker than the fourth value? Am I just like so skilled that I can do this and lay it down and not touch this area in the center? No, I'm not. This is just natural. This is the way that the page wants to take that pigment, because the one difference between this part of the page and this part of the page is that that part of the page has been erased. That's why you want to start off by treating every surface the same. Eventually, I know everything's going to be erased and changed and moved around like it does in any drawing. So I want to make sure when I practice, I put down pigment there first and erase it out. Anyway, okay, let's move on. So now look at what I've got. I've got 1 value, 2 values, 3 values. I'm not going to count this one right now because it's not quite in order, and that's okay. It's not part of my goal to have anything more than an additional value. 1, 2, 3, if I don't count this, now I've got 4. So I've got 4 distinguishable values. I went from no value to 1 value to 2 value to 3 value to 4 value. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to continue. I'm still at the lighter part of the scale. You notice this is the top third, but this one here is the 4th one down, which because the 5th one's in the middle, that's still at the top of the scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take more pigment until I can make that 4th one darker. Now this is going to take a little bit longer. It's going to take a little bit more pigment because that part of the page doesn't want to take the pigment as readily as the part that's already been erased. So I'm going to lay down the pigment, same pressure as always. I'm just doing that. It just looks darker. And now, because I want to move a lot of pigment this time to get that darker, I'm not rubbing it in with my hand at all. I'm just lightly spreading it out with the paper towel. I'm not taking it off, I'm spreading it out just to even it a bit. And now I'm going to carry that up the scale. And this is probably going to take 2, maybe even 3 times before I bring it to the value that I want. Don't get impatient. Don't start thinking, oh, I want it to go faster, I'm going to press down harder. Just stay in control of the process. I'm adding more pigment. Lightly spreading it out and then carrying it up. I'm paying attention to how much pressure I'm using with my hand. I keep my eye focused on that 4th rectangle so that I can see it get darker. Still not quite dark enough. I'm going to add more. And now I'm just going to shut up a little bit until I get it to that point. Okay, hopefully you can see now that this is noticeably darker. It's probably going to have to get darker again later. Remember, this is going to be a process where we're doing it and then we're evaluating what's happened and then we move on. And we sometimes, just like when we're dealing with our measurements and so forth, have to readdress things. But for right now, at least when I'm standing close to it, I can see that distinction. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to this value. This value in the center, the 5th one down, is a very important value. We call that value mid-value. You know, sometimes people when they're working with lights and darks, they fall into the language of color, and it's very confusing. This is not white, nor is down at the bottom going to be what we would call black in color. It is a highlight and it's a low dark. Okay, understanding that's important. We'll talk more about that again at another time. But this mid-value is not a gray. This mid-value is a mid-value, meaning it is halfway between what my highlight is and what my low dark will be. Okay. Now you notice because this page is gray, my highlight is not white. So that means this mid-value is going to be darker than it would be if I were using a white as my highlight. Does that make sense, right? Because this value is not white, the highlight can only be that. Because this material will only get to a certain darkness, which is, yes, it's very, very dark, but it's not as dark as some other material. So what we're looking for that mid-value is what we would ascertain to be halfway between what is available to me in my light, my highlight based on the color of the page, and what's available to me in my dark, my low dark, based upon what my material is capable of doing. So this is a judgment call. For the most part, people make their mid values too light. I'm not really sure why that is, but I think it probably has to do with the fact that anything that has pigment on it we think is dark. That's not true. You know, one way to think about it is to think about, like, if you were going to buy a shirt, is that a light shirt or is that a dark shirt, right? So instead of saying, oh, that's dark because it has charcoal on it, think about it outside of this context. That would be a relatively light shirt. So it's closer in family to the top of my scale right now than it is to the bottom of my scale. And I want it to be right in between. So let me bring that mid value up, or I should say down, at least down my scale in terms of lightness and darkness. And again, it's probably going to take a couple of passes to do this. It's a little bit darker. I need it to go a little bit darker still. By the way, you see things in contrast to each other. So as that mid value gets darker, some of the subtler contrast up here between, say, the third and the fourth value, even though I'm not touching them, might seem to disappear a little bit. That's okay. You notice this time I'm moving it up the scale with my hand so that I can stick it to the page by the time I get to that mid value. That's still too light for a mid value. Once again, I will shut up until I get it there. It's very tempting sometimes, especially when you see it getting darker and darker, but only incrementally. You are going to be very, very tempted to take your charcoal and start adding it there. Don't do that. You only ever add charcoal where it makes sense, in the dark. The rest is determined with the eraser and the redistribution of the material. Almost there. That is almost a mid value for my value, but it's not quite. So I'm still going. Again, hear the sound. I'm still only going that light. Don't bear down more. It looks like more only because there's charcoal underneath that surface. It's very important to establish that mid value in the center, because what we want to do is not just get 9 values out of those 300. In other words, there's 9 values way up here, but they're all represented by this one area of the scale. There's 9 values in here. They're all represented by this area of the scale. We want to find the 9 values that are evenly distributed amongst all of the possible values. So we're trying to nail in what is a mid value out of all of those values. There's some wiggle room here because there's a lot of distinctions in that more subtle scale. Now, one of the things that we're dealing with now, that we don't have to deal with in class, is I'm going pretty fast. I'm going pretty fast because of file sizes and all of that stuff. So this is where I'm going to leave it for the mid value for right now. It can still get darker, but I'll work on that as I go. So I've got 1 value, 2 value, 3 value, 4 value, 5 value. Now I have 6 values. I need to make the value underneath mid value darker, so I'm going to move on down the scale. Again, same pressure. You hear the sound, guys, and it looks darker. Same pressure each and every time. Be patient. Your goal isn't to get through it. Your goal is to build a confidence with your ability to control material. When you've got all of your other drawing issues to deal with, in a drawing proper, you want to make sure that you have the confidence to know that you can get to where you want with the material as you're solving all of those other problems. So focus on the results. Don't focus on getting it done. Focus on it being good. Okay, so I can now see a distinction between my mid value and the value underneath it. Not quite as much as I want, but for right now, I've met my goal. 1 value, 2 value, 3 value, 4 value, 5 value, 6 value, 7 values. The bottom part of the scale is a little bit easier to work with because I've already got a distinction here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So now I can go to the 8th value and I can lay pigment in. Now sometimes on a screen, when you're taking a video of this, it doesn't show up quite as clear. So you might either see it, depending upon how the lighting is working right now, or you might not see it quite as much as I see it in person. But now I have 8 values. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 values. And look at how dark this material can actually get. You see that? Okay. That means that I can put in my 9th value down here, which is as dark as my material can be. And I doubt you're going to be able to see this contrast on a video screen, but maybe you can. I can't look at it and do it at the same time. So now I have 9 values. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now I'm going to start manipulating this and I'm going to start tweaking this a little bit because it's not perfect. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up the edges a little bit. Sometimes makes it a little bit, oops, I just tore the page a bit. Sometimes it makes it just a little bit easier to see when you take out all of that fog around it. Looks a little bit cleaner. You know, I always say this when we're in class, and that is, you know, part of the difficulty of drawing is learning the psychology of drawing. You know, every once in a while, there's just things that you can do that just make you happier about it. Like when I clean up those edges, it looks like a much nicer scale. And it hasn't changed. I mean, I've still got to tweak the value range. I'm still not done. But what I am is I'm just more excited about finishing it because I think it looks so much better once I put those sharp edges down. The psychology of drawing has to do with building a relationship that just makes you love doing this kind of thing. Sometimes practices, especially practices that are so basic, like a value scale, sometimes we think, well, oh, I don't want to do that. I love doing this. This is just fun to do. It's fun to exercise. It's fun to get better with your materials. So now take a look at where you see the least amount of distinction within the value scale right now. The least distinction I see standing up here is right here, probably. These two values look too close together. Doesn't surprise me. I ran into a little bit of trouble right in here. I'm going to start changing that. I also see less of a distinction between these two values. Let's start right up here. Watch what happens first when I take out my light again. Now you notice I have not been back up here since I originally took this light out. But you notice when I erase back into it, it looks lighter again. Look at the high contrast between it and the second value. What's happening up there? Why is it that it got darker and I never even touched it? It's because of the nature of this material. This material floats around. There's dust in the air. It settles on the page. We want to make sure that we come back and reestablish our lights every once in a while. Because that got so light, I can make the second one lighter and still not risk that it's going to disappear. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my eraser. I'm first erasing out here on the blank part of the page just to kind of clean up the edge of the eraser. And I'm just very gradually and very lightly going to let the eraser just kiss the surface of the page. I'm not bearing down on it. In other words, I'm not going to try to take it all out and then try to redo it. I just want to take out a little bit of pigment. Pay attention to what you see happening. Don't just go through the step, because if you do, it's going to get too light and it's going to disappear on you. All we want to do is make it lighter so that we can still see a distinction. Now look at the high contrast that happens between it and the one right underneath it. Remember, these are the two that we have the trouble with. They're too close together. But lightening that one up allows me to lighten this one up a little bit. I'm touching it very softly. And you notice I'm moving my hand in a circular direction. That's so that I hit the tooth in all different directions, so that it wants to take that pigment off no matter where that pigment is sticking. Now, it's got a little bit of streaking in it, but I don't want to take off more pigment. I'm going to take a clean part of the paper towel. If I used a dark part of the paper towel, it's going to make it dark. So I'm going to take a clean part of the paper towel. I'm just going to even this out. Look at how much better the top three look. And notice that I can see now a distinction between the third and the fourth one. Now, I'm going to start tweaking this part of the scale. I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to very lightly carry a little bit of pigment up into that fourth value. Now when I do this, remember I'm tweaking it. I'm changing my scale a little bit. I'm examining what happened. I'm making a decision about it. And when I do this, because I'm pulling pigment from the bottom, I'm inevitably going to be destroying some of the value range that I had down here. Remember, our goal isn't to get to the end. Our goal is to understand how to manipulate our material to a certain end. My goal is to make that one a little bit darker as I tweak it. That's my goal. I'm not going to be panic-stricken about the fact that I've lost other decisions, because I know I can reclaim them, and I also know my scale is getting much, much better. Remember, these are the two that we didn't see any difference between before. Notice how much we can see that difference. And it's going to be even greater, because remember how we were talking about the mid-value here not being quite dark enough? I'm going to pull a little bit more pigment up into that mid-value. By the way, don't start putting lines into the scale. Remember, the only lines that were in the scale are the lines that went in when we very first started it. We're not putting lines back into this. Okay, we're going to see the distinction in value just based upon the value that we see. You notice every time I deal with one value, I also deal with the rest of the scale. I think, or I hope, at this point in the semester, that should sound familiar to you. We never deal with looking at one part of our shape without always examining it in relationship horizontally and vertically to where it is in relationship to other shapes. Well, the same thing is here. I'm never looking at one value without comparing that value and treating that value equally with the other values that I'm after. Now you notice underneath mid-value, we've lost a distinction there. I'm going to see what kind of distinction I can get just by pulling pigment up the page to begin with, and see if I can get anything. Now up close to it, I can see a little difference, but not enough. Coming back down to my bottom third of the scale, adding more pigment. You know, it's sometimes really helpful to leave a little black, a little very dark mark on the page there in order to see that you're not even close to a low dark and you have a lot more room to work in. I hope I'm not standing in front of this and blocking your view. At least not too much. Whenever you see me grab the paper towel, it's because I want to move pigment. The paper towel will want to move the pigment a little bit more aggressively than my hand. Now you notice I didn't see a distinction in here just a moment ago. Now there's a clear distinction. I still probably want to get it just a tiny little bit darker. Not much. And because I only want to get it a tiny little bit darker, remember what I just said. The paper towel moves the pigment a lot. Your hand doesn't move it quite as aggressively. So here, because I want it to just go a little bit darker, I'm not using the paper towel. I'm carrying my hand up. The change happens very quickly. And I'm going to stop there. Clear distinction between my mid value and the next value, and then the next value. So now I'm going to come back into it, pushing this darker area into the page a little bit. And now I'm coming back to my bottom 2, adding a value in. And again, the darker part of the scale, I'm not sure if you can read that on a video at a fairly low resolution because I want to be able to upload this without any trouble. Okay, I hope you can see that distinction. I can probably make it a little bit more noticeable for you without, I don't know if I did that or not. I don't know if that happens on the video or not. And then the bottom part of my scale, the very last value, almost certain you're not going to see this, but you're going to have to trust me that in like direct light, at least in real life, I can see that distinction pretty clearly. Now, you notice what I just did. I just decided, you know what? I'm saying one thing to you, but I don't really believe it. I think I can see a little bit more of a distinction if I carry this up again. If it gets too dark, carry some of that excess pigment out to the rest of the tooth of the page because that's going to want to hold on to it. I hope you understand what I mean by that. I mean that I want to take some pigment off. I don't want to make it so that I can't see this distinction anymore. But I can take some pigment off, I can lighten up the bottom a bit, and I can do that by moving some of that pigment into this tooth that's going to want to hold on to it. And now I'm just going to rework these bottom 2. Still putting it down with a very light touch. Now that looks much, much better. I know I'm trying to keep file sizes down, but I don't want to give you something that I don't like. So now I'm down at the very bottom of the scale. And now I can see that even clearer. Hopefully you can see it clearer. And if not, the last 3 or 4 minutes have been just a waste of time. And I hope that's not the case. Okay? So now that is 9 distinguishable values in my value scale. I think I could still probably work down here to kind of make this one go just a little bit darker. In other words, there's tiny little tweaks that I can still do. And when you're working on this, of course, you're working outside of the studio at school. So take your time. Don't try to do it as fast as this. Keep in mind, guys, that, I've been doing this for a long, long time. In fact, every semester, I practice multiple value scales simply because I show it to multiple classes. Which means that when you see me practice it, it can seem like, okay, that's not too hard. I'll do that later. But realize it's going to take you longer. Now, I don't know that for a fact. It could be that you're a whiz at this and it comes out perfect for you in no time at all. Okay? But it's likely that if you've never done this before, or if the last time you've done this was in a class that you had, say, last semester, it's very, very likely that this is going to take you a little bit of time to get these distinctions to be visible and to be a good representation that you can control your material. And you don't just do it once, you do it again and again and again. One of the advantages, I think, of teaching is that you are forced into practicing because of course, you're showing people how to practice. There's my value scale. Now, there's one more thing I want you to do with it that's going to relate to something else that I'm going to show you in a future video or slide presentation, depending upon what technology works best. I'm still trying to work this out. So, what I want you to do is I want you to label your values. We don't label them 1 through 9. It doesn't make much sense. We're going to label them in a way that allows you to understand your values. Again, I'll explain that to you a little bit more. For now, let's just learn these terms. This is your highlight. Highlight is as light as your page can get. This is your light. This is your mid-light. And this is your low light. You notice everything above mid-value is all light. It all has the word light in it. And then you have mid-value that has neither the word dark or light in it. And then you have high dark, you have dark, mid-dark, and low dark. Okay? So these are the names of these values: highlight, light, mid-light, low light, mid-value, high dark, dark, mid-dark, and low dark. I want you to practice the scale. I want you to refine the scale. I want you to go through it in the order in which you saw me do it here. If you need to back up and re-watch that, go ahead and do that. And I want you to make sure that you are identifying and understanding the order of the names, the titles of these different values, because that's going to come into play later. Whew, that was fast. Okay, so guys, stay safe and practice, keep working. I'm not sure where things are going from here. The information that I'm getting looks like we're going to be doing a lot of interaction this way, and I will be sending you more information as I figure it out. We're kind of all in this together, and we'll do the best that we can. Okay, so take care of yourselves. I'll talk to you soon. All right, bye-bye.